Hi everybody, and welcome to a new episode of the Ventuz Wednesday webinar. In the last weeks, we focused on special topics like data inputs or substance integration, but today we will have a general Q&A about the design. For this, we collected some questions from the community, common questions which pop up every now and then, and these will be rather beginner and intermediate questions, as the complex tasks would go beyond the scope of this webinar. And please understand that we cannot answer every question, so we will note them and try to answer them in another webinar. So probably we will have this kind of Q&A for also for design director or config editor, and we will see. Fortunately, I'm not alone with all these questions. I'm here with my colleagues from content production and support. And so I shortly introduce them. These are Daniel, Dennis, Jan, sorry, Götz. Yeah, okay, Jan we already had. And last but not least, it's Stephen. I'm Carol, I'm the moderator for today, so I won't answer questions. I will just pick them and forward them to my colleagues. So, yeah, guys, shall we start? Yes? Okay. That was a clear yes. Okay, so let me see, what is the first question? The first question is, how can I read a directory with images and display them depending on the amount of items in this folder? Yeah, I think this question goes to Jan.
Yes, indeed, it does. So we'll start sharing the screen right now. Let's see. So, okay. So what do we have to do? First off, we need some. We need to let's say, yep. We need to put it into a frame. Yeah, so you can't just dynamically create content. So we have to get some image containers in there and configure them for us. So first thing would be an image, and then we convert this to a container, and let's call this one image 1, and get this one on interfacing mode and just copy them. Let's say 5, and let's go in here. And for this, we need to get some data in here. So we grab an array indexer with a string and give the file to the indexer on value 0. So we can get information from the outside. We need to expose this one and get outside. And then we get a directory node. And here you define a path for the images or where they are stored. You could take any folder you like, just copy and paste it from the Explorer and put it in here. Close the text editor down, and you will see you found 5 JPEG files. We also put that on auto update, so it will update and check. I don't know the specific time, but yeah, every few seconds to see if the files are still in there. And let's get this to the array, so he knows where to get the file from. And then we have our first file in there. They are overlaying right now, that's why you can't see anything. So yeah, let's just update all these with left shift and right click over them. So we have everything in there, and now we can just connect all these arrays to the directory. And then we have all the files in there. To see them better, let's take an arrange node and put it to center chain. And get a better offset and put another axis in front so we see something. Okay, so now we have the problem that all display just one image because everyone is assigned to the same value. So we have to define the start value. For this, we have to tell every container which one he is actually in. And there's a handy node for this. You just grab the container info node, and in there's an output property named name index. And because I called this one image 1, this node recognizes it and calls this one and the name index as 1. So we can define our start point here and hit name index. But the problem is here, array start at 0. So we have to get a small expression for this, so we don't start at 1, and we start at the same point as the array does. Very easy expression here, just say a minus 1, and then it gets the first picture. And what we also want is that if there are not enough images, that they are not displayed empty, so they get blocked. So what we do for this is get the axis in here and another Boolean expression. And there we just say if A is bigger than B, and we will expose B. B will be the count of the directory with how many images you found. And so we expose this one and get A from here and the name index. So A in this part is the container, and B will be the count from outside. And the result will be blocked. And if we would update this now, everything gets blocked because he has no information on the count yet. So we grab all of them in here. You could also just hit strg and q, and then grab the Boolean and drop it onto count. And now we get them displayed properly. And if we now would, let's say, delete 3 of them and wait for a second, then you have them displayed on the image amount. So I think, yeah, that should be it.
Yeah, I had to unmute myself. Yeah, okay, great, thank you very much, Jan. So we proceed with the next question. The next question is, how can I get all folders in a directory? This is a question from Götz.
Okay, yeah. I believe there's some kind of follow-up question to what Jan just showed.
Yeah, it's definitely related to this.
So when you use a directory node to read files from a directory, let's say I want to read whatever is in my asset folder of my project. What happens is, yeah, you can include the subfolders, but it still just gives you the files. So I can say I want to get all the data or all the files from the directory. So in my directory, I have a couple of subfolders with some images and some other files, but you never really get like the subfolders themselves. And it's quite a common use case that when you create dynamic scenes, at some point you probably have the folder and you first want to know how many subfolders or what subfolders you have, and then choose one of them. You see in the result array, I have everything, so I could parse the array, but I don't want that. So there is a nice little thing about expressions that's really helpful to know. If I check so for expressions, I have some namespaces available for .NET functionalities that I can use. Is it open? And if I go into the .NET documentation, that's something that I have to know or learn once, and then it's super useful. There are a couple of questions, a couple of classes in the system IO, and one is the IO directory class. And if I check the methods, there should be one called get directories. And that's actually what I want. So I don't find exactly that on one of the Ventuz nodes, so I just use directly the .NET functionality. And I can use that in a string expression. So let's say A is my path, and I want to have all the direct subfolders, all the directories in A. You see my string expression is red, and it says the name directory does not exist in the current context. That's because I have to use the full name, because here we saw only these namespaces has been made available. So if I want to use the other one, I have to use the full name, which is system.io directory. It's still red, but this time we have a different error. And it says cannot convert type string array to string. That's because that method returns a string array, but my string expression wants to output a string. So also quite easy, with like 2 seconds of Google, I find out that in .NET, you can pretty easy combine an array as one string, for example, with a string join method. And it takes 2 arguments. One is the separator that I want to use, and the other one is exactly the array that I want to join, which is this one. And now you see I have a without string with my array. So, and it's quite hard to see, but these are all my, should be all my subfolders in there. Okay, what do I do with that string now? If I want to use it, let's say I want to convert it again into an array, that's super easy, because like the bindings themselves, they can convert some data types. A lot of times you do it in the scene and you don't even notice. So if I want to split my array into individual elements, for example, with a string indexer node, or with an array indexer with type string, that's waiting for a string array. If I connect that to this output, the binding itself will automatically convert it into a string, and I have all my elements here, or all my subfolders. And then typically from here, I do what, for example, what Jan just did before. So I put like just a specific subfolder in a directory and display only these images, or sometimes I just need to count them to show some button menus. Yeah, and this is actually the easiest, and yeah, I believe the easiest way to get the subfolders from a directory, by knowing that I can use some .NET functionalities, and by knowing that the system.io class has a couple of super useful classes. Okay.
Honestly, for me as a non-programmer, this is very, very useful. Do you mind if I copy that scene later on and make it public on the forums? Because I think many people could take an advantage out of that. I like it. I really like it.
Yeah, sure. It's just one line on the expression note. So
yeah. But I've never used programming. I'm not used to programming, so.
It was a very beautiful line of code. That's really.
So yeah, the nice thing about using .NET functionality in expressions is that I don't need to write a C# script. So many people think if you talk about C# or .NET, they think they have to learn how to program a script. And with these expressions, you don't have to. And also in the scene, the expression is much lighter than a C# script, because it doesn't have to be compiled. It's just how to see.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. It's yeah, it's a very powerful node. Great, thank you very much. I think we have 1 or 2 questions which are related to the first one that Jan answered. I think we should read this. one of our attendees is asking, can we create the containers dynamically according to the number of images? Yeah, this is, does anyone want to answer this, or shall I?
Well, it's a common question we have here and then whenever we are on the road or working together with you as our customers. And no, basically, it's not possible to have dynamic content created in real time in the engine. You cannot create containers during the runtime. This is not possible for now. We have some things on the roadmap, but we cannot promise you when these things will be implemented into the engine. So it's from my side. I don't know if someone wants to add something to that.
No, that's right. Yeah, this is unfortunately this is not possible. You can. Might be some tricks if you work with scene ports, and which again have so you load a scene into a scene port, which again has a scene port in it. So this way you can somehow create content, dynamic content, but this is pretty complicated to handle this construct. So, but it's not, yeah. So there is no easy way to dynamically create content in Ventuz, because you have you have 100. You prepare for 100 items, but then your customer gives you 150, then you have a problem, or you have to handle it this another way. But yeah, you cannot dynamically extend your scene to cope with 150 items. Okay, this is answered so far. Yes, I think we shall just go on with the next question that we prepared.
Maybe Carol?
No, yes.
Just as an add-on, I saw another question popping
Okay.
where somebody asked about, is it possible to get scenes loaded over TCP command or so? Because even though you cannot create containers dynamically, you can load the same scene multiple times.
Yeah, you can.
Which is not the same thing, but maybe it helps.
Yes, that's what I meant. Is like there are some workarounds, yeah, but you have to prepare your you need a layout scene or something, or a base scene which can handle these, so can load multiple scenes. Do you mean that?
Yeah, but because you can do it through remoting, but you can also do it by just plugging the scenes into the scene ports and replicating them.
Yeah, this will be a workaround, yeah, because you don't dynamically create containers, but you use the scene port in the scene itself as a workaround. But this is pretty complicated. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so let's go on with the next answer. No, with the next question first. So the next question would be, how can I bring content of multiple scenes to multiple screens? Yeah, I guess it's multiple screens for the same machine or different machines. I don't know. This is not clear from the question. And this would be something for Daniel. Then it's your question. Let's go.
Maybe because we need scene layers, I could quickly try to show how to load scenes to ports and then go over to multiple screens. So I could take an add-on to the part before, and then I answer the question after, if it's okay.
Yeah.
Because we would need those ports afterwards anyway. And maybe not everybody knows them. In Ventuz, we have a node called scene layer or scene port. And it actually allows us to load Ventuz scenes into Ventuz scenes, so we can cascade scenes into each other. And I personally always, if I do things like that, I always use an editor which is called Scene Tree Editor, because in there I can see which scene is already in memory and how are the scenes connected together. So if I if I talk about a really simple example with images, because we had that topic before, I could build a scene and call it, I don't know, main. Oops. Main EMG. And I could put one of these scene ports, or in that case, a scene layer in there, and I could build a second one.
Can you please share your screen?
I got it. Okay.
Sorry.
First time, so you can share screen. I'm so sorry. So I built one main scene with a scene layer. I use the editor. I mentioned scene tree editor, so I can see all the scenes that I'm working with, all the scenes that are in memory, which scene is currently active, rendering in the rendering window actually. And there I simply do just an image, for example, and I plug that one in there. So I have a main scene that is loading an image. Through layouting, I could, I don't know, make sure it's smaller and some position somewhere. And then if I would want to replicate it, I could add multiple of these ports and load the same scene in there. So I could save that one. Save as, and save its image. And I could go in any other port and just load the image scene in there. Where is it? Let me save it. With image. So, because that, I think it's not clear for everybody that even though I can only edit one scene at one time in Designer, I can load the same scene multiple times in memory. And I could also set different parameters like different images in. Through that way, I can, even though I cannot create containers, I could create elements and reuse and replicate them with different functions. Okay. Just as a side note, maybe. And talking about, because the question was, how can we get multiple scenes to multiple screens, right? Errol?
Exactly. How can I bring content of multiple scenes to multiple screens?
The things we need to do is, first of all, we need to create, or we need a setup where we make sure that we have like a multiple displays connected to our computer, and then we create a unified desktop out of these displays. And to do so, we need a graphic card that is able to do mosaic mode, which is a professional multi-screen mode by NVIDIA, or surround mode, which is the gamer multi-screen mode by NVIDIA, or Eyefinity, which is the multi-display solution by AMD. So we need a card that supports that. Then we take the displays. We want to display Ventuz content. If we talk about a single machine setup, we create a display group with these graphic driver tools provided by NVIDIA or AMD. So basically, we define one big rectangle of, let's say, 2 screens side by side, and then we can create a Ventuz scene that is rendering onto that rectangle. But we can, right now, not address single screens. We can only address multiple unified displays. So if I Google it, it would be like that. As I explained, you need a card that supports NVIDIA mosaic mode or surround mode or AMD Eyefinity, and we need to create one single display adapter out of multiple screens. So that's like the basic thing we need to do. And then talking about Ventuz, we do it like that. But first of all, open any content. that. And my project has a certain design resolution or design dimension, and I want to make sure that my rendering view or my canvas is actually fitting my display setup of and I can do it like that. I can go to my stage editor in Ventuz Designer and say I want to create a new render setup. And the render setup is the part in Ventuz that defines how the scene is actually, or it's rendered on which canvas. Like whatever rendering. And in there, I say I want to have one machine, 2 HD screens, 2x1 side by side, because that's how I set up my Infinity or my Mosaic. This is it. And in Designer, I select the same one here, and I see my scene is stretched onto that canvas. And now the question was, how can I get not one scene to multiple screens? Because what you see there is one scene on multiple screens. If I would have set it up my GPU with multiple displays and then my canvas to that mode, I can render on these screens. But what we want to do is have multiple scenes on multiple screens. So I would do it like that. I will create another main scene with ports, because that's I think the easiest way to do. We delete the delay. I will save it as main screens. And I go back to my scene tree editor and I plug content 1 into that port. So I can see in combination content scene combined with the main 2 screen scene. And through layouting of the scene layer, I can switch the percentage, set it to 50% and align it to the left. So I have split my canvas into 2 parts, left and right. I define ports for that. And I do another one for the right side. I also set it to 2% canvas and align to the right. And then I plug another scene in there. In the scene tree editor, you always see the active scene, and then the green ones are part of the active scene tree, so they are also rendered. But the orange one is the one that I currently actively edit in design. And yeah, so I have 2 screens split it by the layering of the scene layers and the relation and width. I just move it to the left and the right, and I actually can. So it's a very simple scene that I can interact, and that is exchanging some data. So that's maybe the last thing that is interesting. How can we make sure that if we have a simple setup like that, like 2 screens, but maybe only one of them is a touch screen, and the other one is a normal small video wall or 4K screen or whatsoever, how can we make sure that the interaction data is only addressed to the left screen, because that's going to be the touch screen and the other one is not. It's a screen that is not touchable. And currently I need to touch both sides. So my 2U signal would need to match the same canvas size. And to do that, I can go back to configuration editor, because in there, beside creating those setups and doing some splitting more complicated things, I can create or enable a touch area. I can unlock it. And I can define the area of my render setup that is actually receiving or that is matching the rectangle of the 2U or Windows touch standard, like in our case, a simple touch screen. I just map it to the first three. Let's save. No. Switch back. And if I enable my input diagnostics again, I can see that I have a green small frame around my first screen, and I see that when I touch it, my touch input is mapped to the left side. So I can only touch the touch screen, and the video was non-interactive. Create a small, simple interactive setup with multiple scenes on multiple screens. Yeah, that's like basically how I would try to solve it. If we talk about a simulation. Okay, Carol, do you think it answers?
Yes, for me, definitely. Cool, thank you very much. Yeah, guys, so how should we proceed? We have some interesting questions which popped up during the last 15 or 20 minutes. Should we take these first and then go on with the prepared questions? Like, okay, then I think there is an interesting question, but it's pretty short to answer, I think. This about the 3D layer render target stuff. Hi all. Can someone quickly show how to create one 3D layer, make it render to a render target only, and pipe that into a texture of another 3D layer? Yeah.
I can show because I have a 3D scene there. So
okay, please, go ahead. So go on. But I think this is a very common task. This pretty often.
So the question was, take a 3D layer, render it off screen, and pipe it into any other 3D layer.
Yes, pipe that into a texture of another 3D layer. So I'm not sure if the person means that he wants uses full screen or full layer, or use this as a texture of an object in another 3D layer. So that's not clear from that question.
So you can do both. I would do both.
Yeah, creating an off-screen layer is kind of easy. I can do it on any 3D layer in the layouting section, or I can do it on a group. In my example, because I already have the complete composition of things with background parties and stuff like that, I do it in the group layer. But I could do it also on the 3D layer directly. So that's an off-screen render, but I can also do it there. So my whole composition of things is not rendered directly on screen, but it's rendered in a texture. And then I can create another 3D layer. And in there, I could create an object. And a material. And on the material, I create a material stage and say I want to use the off-screen render target as a base texture. For default, I get a loader in there that I can fill with any picture or image that I have in my hard disk or somewhere else. Or I can say I want a texture property for a movie clip like video or whatever. And I can only just click on texture property. And I get a loader that has a texture property that I need to connect to the output of the off-screen layer. So I expose it from here to the layer level. It pops up on the input side of the 3D layer, and I connect it to the composition, and then with my complete composition rendered into a render target, and then have it applied to a sphere in the 3D case. So whenever I work or I change something in here, like changing the color or moving something, then it's updated the real-time render screen. Is that clear?
Yeah, oh no, never seen this before. Wow, so you are a magician, really? No, okay, it's clear. I think it's, yeah, this was complicated.
I think the things you can stumble across is to create a material stage. You need to make sure that you replace the loader that can load an image by a texture property. And then we need to expose it because we need to bring it onto the same level in this and the output property of the offspring member, and then put it on.
Yeah. Great, thank you very much. Yeah, okay, so let's go on with the next question. This is one for, I think it's for Dennis, yeah. It's about shadows. Can I create real-time shadows? Dennis?
You probably not, because you're focusing just on coding. No, kidding. Yeah, for sure you can. Let me share my screen, and I prepared a simple scene for that. Just a second, sharing here. So I start up with basic floor, have a camera and a spotlight, but the important thing is already the spotlight in this case. So the spotlight can be a simple spotlight, or we have already predefined like a spotlight with the shadow options enabled, and you just need to drag and drop that on top. So it appears to be black now, but it's not the truth. Here we go. You enable the show non-render objects in this case, and use the free flight camera, and you see that the spotlight is coming directly from the front, hitting the surface, which appears to be black. And then you can adjust the spotlight and suit it to your needs, like bring it closer to here, and change the height and the pitch. So this is an easy way to adjust the spotlight. Yeah, basically that's how you adjust the spotlight, to point it on this floor or on this texture. And then you have dozens of properties for that. So here we go. So what did I do to bring up that bright spotlight? We have dozens of properties here on the right side when you select the spotlight. And one thing is when you drag and drop the spotlight shadow node into, it has already the shadow enabled and selected the shadow map. Right click on that property and you see here now the amount, the resolution for the texture, the bias values, in which channel it should go, because you can filter out spotlights or shadows later on in the scene. You can change the sampling and so on, which makes the overall look finer, and then all these settings like the anti-alias scale and the filter scale taken into account. You can change the tint color and so on. So basically you have now a spotlight that can throw a shadow. So whenever I bring now an object into the scene like this rectangle and rise up the position, you see, wow, this rectangle also produces now a nice shadow. There are some things to keep in mind whenever you do so. For example, when I use the material and a texture applied on that with base and alpha, the point is that you want to have also sometimes the alpha throw a shadow, or the non-alpha areas should be included and so on. So I'm selecting now a texture like this PNG, which has an alpha, and just the smiley is black. So I'm selecting the smiley. But as you see, the whole rectangle is now throwing a shadow, which is not, in fact, what we want, because we want to have this smiling face only throw a shadow on the ground, on the floor. Therefore, you select the material, and you see here these shadow options. Select these shadow options, and select shadow options instead of the inherit. And here is, my friend, the simple caster shader. You want to disable this simple shader. Whenever you do so, you see that you throw now a correct shadow on the floor. Another thing why I mentioned this small trick is when you have, for example, a sphere or any kind of dynamic mesh, like an animated skeleton, an animated character who moves around and uses an animation rig, you probably encounter the same issue. You use the material, again here, we use in this case the Perlin or vertex noise, doesn't matter, we just want to deform this mesh, we animate it infinite. But you see that the shadow still is looking like a sphere. And it's the same issue you have here. You need to enable the shadow options and say it's not a simple caster shader that should be used. You disable that, and there you see the vertex deformations based or applied on this mesh will now taken into account and therefore render the shadow correctly. This goes for if you have a fence or something like that in your scene and it's made out of an alpha or PNG image, you probably have rectangles throwing the shadow on the ground, but you want to have the real fence texture cut out and throwing the shadow on the surface. Yeah, basically that's it. It's just a small thing, but I think it's a good tip or a good hint to know about this simple caster shadow shader, that you have to disable that to get proper results on your surface. You're welcome.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Cool. Yes, those ends with shadows. Okay. And now the next question is, it's for Steven. How can I draw lines between two moving objects in 3D space? Steven, is there any possibility to do this?
Yes. So, yeah, since Ventuz 6.0, we have an option to do that. That is actually quite easy to use, I'd say. So since we have implemented the particle system, as a side effect, we also implemented a node that can draw lines or meshes along paths, and it can also dynamically create such paths using the 3D coordinates of different locations in your scene. The node that I'm talking about is the arrow node, and there are two versions of it. The first one being the path arrow, which just simply renders along a given path that we can load from SVG file or from a path that we got from Cinema 4D, and the one that we need to use for moving objects in 3D space, which is most interesting in interactive scenes, is the anchor arrow node. And yeah, as you can see, I have prepared a small scene to show that. So we have just simple images here that we can move around. We can look around the scene a little bit like that. And I would now like to prepare the scene so that we have a sphere in the middle of the images, and just to make it look a little bit more appealing, draw lines from the sphere to each one of these pictures that we have in the 3D space. So first I will have to place my sphere. Oops. Here we go. Can also scale it a little and move it around. And what I would also most likely want to do is also make it touchable and translatable through touch with our very easy to use interaction nodes. So I can now move this sphere around using my mouse as well. And as you can see, I have now placed the arrow just right next to the sphere. because I want the all the lines to start in the inside the sphere or at the same location in my 3D space. And now the next thing I would need to do is tell the arrow where the lines should go. So right now it's not rendering anything because it only knows one point in our 3D space, but I need to tell it more of them. And I can do so using specific nodes, which I can place at the according positions in my hierarchy tree. So here I have my image panels. So you can see those are these. And I can use anchor nodes to get my world location at this point in the hierarchy. So I'll just copy that several times. Like that. And now I need to create a chain of those anchors and finally connect that chain to my arrow anchor input. So I will start with the last anchor that I want to connect to my arrow. Connect that to the output of my second last anchor and go through it to my first anchor. And now I can, just like that, connect the anchor input to the output of my last anchor. So as you can see, it's now rendering something. It still looks a little bit weird. It's just going from my sphere where my arrow node is to my last image, to the second last, and so on to the first. But I wanted it to go to each of my images. So there are several options that I can use to render between multiple locations in 3D space. And I could, for example, use it with a linked mode, which is what we do now. We can use it with a linked mode, but only with a tip at the very end. So there are no arrows in the stations in between them, just in the last one. Yeah, I can just render single arrows that are not connected, so that I have one arrow from my arrow location to anchor 4 and now from anchor 3 to anchor 2 as well. And what we want to do is we want to render the lines from center. This is one thing that we can change when we want to render such an arrow. And now we can change the appearance of it a little bit more. So we could change the profile, for example. We can change the tube's diameter that we have here. We can change if it's round, beveled, something like that. We can even change the bevel count, anything like that. And we can also change the tip. We can change the mesh that we want to use at the end to anything that we have predefined, like sphere or something. By default, it's using a cone because it's looking most like an arrow, but we can also use our custom mesh with a mesh loader. For simple lines, we can also just disable it. And that's basically it. And we can also change the curvature of our arrow with our absolute and relative arc heights. So if I change both of them to 0, for example, those are just straight lines, which was, I think, for this scene, which only has straight lines, the most beautiful version of that. And as you can see, I can still move around the images, and the lines will change accordingly, which is perfect for interactive scenes or scenes that react to real-time data, anything like that. Yeah, I hope this gives a little insight into our newly introduced arrows and anchors that we have since Ventuz 6.
Thank you very much. You have, oh, Daniel, you have a question. Okay, this is very surprising.
Stephen,
Daniel.
since it's meshes for the tips and the meshing the line, is it possible to add materials or gradients?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Sure. So let me share my screen again.
Yes,
there you go.
Possible. That's it. Goodbye.
Yeah. Yeah, let me just very.
It's possible about arrow.
It is possible, and it's also possible to have that for the different parts of the arrow. So here in the profile, for example, we can define that it's a tube. We can change the size and levels and stuff like that. And we can also change or apply a custom material to that. There are even two materials for tube. One is for the outer sides of my tube, and one is for the caps at the end and the start of the tube. And yeah, I can, for example, let me just quickly change the color to white so that you can see what happens. And now on my material, I can, for example, add a texture to it, like that. I can change the UV mapping as well, just like you can do with the material on all other things as well, like that. You can also, like with other materials, use alpha textures, stuff like that. And you can do the same for the tips. So this has also its own material. And if you at some point feel like this is getting overwhelmingly much inside this one property editor, you could also just create a material node, not inside the hierarchy, but inside your content, define your material inside here. You now have a material provider node instead of a material node, and you can just change the property group material that we have here on our, for example, on our tip to a property, and just reference that material provider instead of creating all that in the same property editor. And now you have a single node for that.
And I can bind them to multiple materials in hierarchy, right?
Right. You can also bind them to multiple nodes in the hierarchy, which is some step between our old material system and an instancing material system, which could help with applying a material to several nodes at once. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much. Okay, so what do we have in our question list? There is one question about 3D audio for virtual reality for the HMDs. 3D audio is gone since Ventuz 4. How can one make the balance of audio be depending on the angle one is facing with a HMD? Yeah, to be honest, this is not really possible. We are aware of this, and we also already have the feature request in our database, but yeah, I cannot promise any Ventuz version that this will come. So yeah, it's currently not possible that easy. There is another question commonly pops up about scripting small simple games in Ventuz. Are we able to create simple games like Pong in Ventuz Designer? For example, the ball should move and change direction after hitting the pedal or the wall based on the position of hit. Some kind of physics, basically. Yeah, Ventuz is not a game engine, so it's not that easy. A very simple game like Pong, it's this would be somehow possible to make this work in Ventuz. You have to split the lot, and you have to keep track of the objects, of the ball and of the pedals. You have to know the bounding boxes of these objects, and the mathematics for the reflection of the ball on the pedal. This is pretty simple. But if simple Pong would go, I think I already saw 1 or 2 versions. But everything beyond such a simple game is pretty complicated to solve this in Ventuz. And Ventuz is not a game engine.
Do you have a mail address whom I can bother for these things, like implementing physics?
Yes, you can write at support@ventuz.com, as always.
Yeah. Probably get banned then, right?
No, we do not ban. Okay. Does anybody see another interesting question in the list?
One interesting question, which apparently pops up from time to time, and especially when I'm on a road, having a trade show or something like that, is how do we do camera calibration, if it's possible in Ventuz and so on. And we always, and we always answer it by having no real camera calibration routines implemented into Ventuz. You can use the traditional ways like shaping and warping and stuff like that, and edge blending, which is automatically calculated and stuff like that. But I remember that Daniel was on a road one time, and he implemented something for, I don't remember correctly who it was, but you found out a solution to get the shapes for the warping of the camera stuff. There was something, we have something integrated that you can use a texture.
Yes.
Pardon?
Yes. It was basically it was for picture.
Yeah.
And it was a very simple user integration, but it was not more than reading their file format, extracting it, so you get the blend texture, which is basically a black and white texture we can load into our layering system, and a warp texture that we can load into our distortion effect layer. And then additionally the view and projection matrices for the different cameras. It was kind of a manual rigged Ventuz scene that is reading the data and extracting.
Yeah, but better than no solution in the end, to be honestly.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, guys, 1 hour is over. I would say that we bring this to an end here. And all the questions that we did not answer, I think there shouldn't be many. So feel free to post this in the forum or to write at Ventuz.com, at support@ventuz.com. So we will answer them. And probably, don't know about the plans, but I think we will have such a Q&A probably for the director or for the config editor and so on in the next weeks or something. Probably there will be another episode of Q&A for designer. So we will see. So far. Thank you very much.
Have a look at the list. We have still some questions left open. We will still collect them, keep them with us, and keep in mind that we have a Discord. So pop into Discord, post your questions there. We will be happy to collect them all for the next Q&A we will have. And drop us a line and so on. So it's quite fun and nice to see what kind of questions pop up here. They might not be only related to, I'm looking to the right side because Carol is my right screen here. they must not be only related to the design or the topic we have chosen. So you can drop down any question you have here in the chat, and we are happy to answer them. Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Should we create like a Discord channel for
I would do.
questions?
Yeah, I will do that. I will do.
For the next sessions?
Yeah, I will create a Q&A collection or something like that, a channel in Discord. So please move over there, see you there, and drop your lines there. It's great.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. And yeah, bye-bye. See you next time.
Ciao mit V sagen wir.
Yeah.
Ciao mit V.
Haut rein, Digga.
Ciao, Kakao.
Ciao, ciao.
Tschüss.